an exciting day, and I'm so glad to see so many folks joining us to learn with and from Ramesh. So Ramesh Sivanpillai is one of our 2017 or 2019 fellows, right? But the thing is that I've known Ramesh for so many years, and the history goes something like this. Every time we would meet on campus, I would say to him, you know, Ramesh, you should become a LAMP fellow. And finally, he applied, and we're really, really glad that he did. He's rocks students' worlds every day in his teaching across disciplines, ranging from a lot of survey of remote sensing courses, but also some very unique courses in environmental policy, conservation, and development that he teaches with a corresponding travel abroad to India. His students write incredible blogs from their travels and learning in India, so I highly recommend taking in some of his students' writings as a testament to all that Ramesh does to support their learning. So without further ado, let me pass it over to you, Ramesh.
Okay, thank you for the great introduction. Now I need to make sure I live up to the expectation that you have made. Good morning, everyone. As Rachel mentioned, my name is Ramesh Sivanpillai. So I came to Wyoming in 2002, and I've been doing research. Was the primary part, and then moved into teaching, so on and so forth. And since I didn't go to high school or any school system here in the US, it was always interesting for me and important for me to learn how kids are learning in the school system here. So when they come to college, I will know how to interact with them. That's another story for another day. But today, I want to focus on this course that has benefited a lot from the comments that Rachel mentioned, incorporating active learning strategies. So to set the stage, I teach this class every fall, about 20 to 30 students, mostly from rangeland ecology, agroecology. They make up about 75% of the students, and the rest of them are from the other ag econ, biology, geography, etc. So one of the midterm exams that I've been doing for a long time is to track changes in leaf color. So some of you may be wondering, why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this activity? There's something else better to do for the students? So before I go and answer that question, I want to provide some brief background info. So I know this term was mentioned a couple of times already. So what is remote sensing? So that is to make observations without physical contact. So right now, your eyes are remotely sensing this presentation that I'm sharing, okay? There is something happening in the monitor that your eyes are picking up. Without any physical contact, you are able to say, oh, that's white background, black font, and all the other things that you have displayed in your screen. Specifically, I focus on remote sensing of the Earth. That means we are observing the Earth's surface from above, whether it's an airplane, balloon. I'll show some of those things in the next slide. But nowadays, it's very easy to explain what I do for my living, because thanks to Google Earth and Bing Maps, they bring these beautiful images about the Earth. So what do we do? It's a very old field. It's much older, than what normally people think, because they view it all in computers. They think it's very recent, but it goes way back, even before World War I. So we take these cameras and expensive sensors, and we put them in these materials like balloons, airplanes, satellites. Nowadays, drones are very popular. and we collect images like this one. So we can work with croplands, rangelands, forest, urban, how things are changing. That's our primary interest. So we can use them during regular or what we call like normal circumstances to see how farmers are managing their land or forestry is changing, or we also look at long-term changes such as the bark beetle impact on the pine trees, wildfires, flooding, so on and so forth. So it's a rich field, providing opportunities for students from multiple disciplines, so it's not just focused on a single area. So most of the things we do revolves around taking an image like this, what we call as a raw image, and we will convert it to this one through a step called processing. So we want to take all the pixels, that are in this image and then assign them into one of the classes that we want to see. So that's the primary motivation behind so many remote sensing projects. We want to go from here to there. So how do we get there? So this is where we want to go and where we start. But long time ago, we relied entirely on human interpretation. Even when I came to US in 92, I remember doing many of these things, and nowadays we focus entirely on digital processing. So we take these images, put it in the computer, use some algorithm, and then out comes the classified image. So that's the big picture. So now how do we teach the students in 14 weeks all this, So most remote sensing courses are designed around starting with the basics, and the light interaction and interpretation of images, how data formats, this is very important. That's how you can tell the software what to look for. And then the important step I talked about, which is the classification, which can range from very simple to advanced, and then doing some accuracy assessment, how good are our images, and to integrate with other data, elevation, soil, etc., and then we get derive secondary information from these. This is what ecologists, environmental scientists, everybody is interested in. They want to take this information and apply it in their field. But it's very difficult to cover all of these in 14 weeks in a semester. So as instructors, we do have certain bias because we want to emphasize certain parts of the course, and also for students, they react accordingly. Sometimes they come up with their own bias, but in general, these are some of the thoughts. They don't want to sit through image basics and interpretation, and they think data formats are so painful to learn. And then, when we get to image classification, they are like, wow, this is really nice. This is what I want to do. And then, okay, I understand I have to do this. It's not that they hate it or something, but it is, okay, we understand. But when we get to the next few, they really get excited and they say at the end, wow, now I see this is real science, But that's what we are all aiming for, to get the students to this point where they really appreciate everything, But many remote sensing courses throughout the US, through another organization, I interact with faculty around many universities. They focus a lot on image classification. That's where they are thinking. When we go to conferences, they will say, oh, my students are learning this technique, which was introduced 3 months ago. So everybody is bragging about how cool their techniques are and what they are teaching their kids. And this is another point where real bragging rights come in. They showcase, oh, my students are doing these great things in class. They got a paper published or they presented in a conference. Everybody is running to this side. In 14 weeks, we want to be spending a lot of times here. But this is where, I'm still an old perspective, an older generation, person. My view is completely different. I say like, yeah, I agree, more complex codes and computationally intense work, you know, people think it will produce accurate products, but I think, wait a second, not so fast. My view is just the opposite. I strongly believe that we have to make sure the students fully understand how the images are acquired, in the sense that why they appear the way they are, so that they can interpret the image, which will lead them to do subsequent steps correctly. Okay, so if they don't understand this piece, then the rest of it is not going to matter. Okay, that's my strong belief, and I've been preaching that for in all my classes. Let's lay the strong foundation, which will then lead to better understanding of all the other things we are going to build. So you might be wondering, oh, there's so much information out there, but why are we stressing the basics? So let me start with this question, why do most leaves appear green in color? So this goes back to one of the fundamental concepts in our field, which is the interaction of light. So we know when light comes in contact with the leaf, it can be absorbed, transmitted, or reflected. So one of these three things can happen. And the reason why the leaf appears green in color is because it reflects more green light, or specifically, the chlorophyll absorbs blue and red. It doesn't need the green light, so leaves appear green in color. So when an image is taken, that feature will appear green because there is more green light coming back. But what happens when that pigment concentration changes in the leaf? This is very fundamental for the students, because they need to know, if I want to separate deciduous trees from conifers, they must know what is the best time to acquire these images. So we tell, okay, when the chlorophyll concentration goes down, other pigments are starting to reflect, which means the reflection is not just dominant in green. It could be both in red and green, and you mix those two primary colors, you get the yellow color. So everything that we see with our eyes goes back to how objects are interacting with light. Now, beyond just the vegetation, yes, every object we see in the world, they are all interacting in a certain way. So water, when it is clear, it will reflect mostly in blue, but when it is turbid, that will shift. Then we know whether water is clear or not in an image. Similarly, when soil, based on color, wetness, etc., everything is changing. So that's why, I hope I have impressed you why this is so critical and important in remote sensing, that we need to keep hammering these concepts throughout the semester. I would love to teach a class entire 14 weeks on this interaction, but I'm sure nobody will enroll in that one. So we don't stress enough in many remote sensing classes, but this is a very crucial concept or a skill, or however you want to define it, but we don't define it in or stress it in enough in many classes, especially if we don't have a final comprehensive exam. Students forget. If it is appearing in the first midterm, they just prepare, write it, and then they forget it. So whenever I used to ask them, "Oh, don't you remember we read this?" And they will say, "Oh, it was so far back." They had already forgotten, because this is not something they think is important, because they want to get to the cool computing process, to make maps that look very attractive or impressive, etc., etc. So what I was looking for was some sort of an activity that students will be able to complete in my class where they will be repeatedly relating to the content, that is the light interaction, you know, and they will reflect on it. So every time they are looking on it, they will know, oh, okay, that's what is happening on the ground, and then use that rich knowledge to apply later in the semester when they are classifying these images. Okay. So I was looking for an activity that will last somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks. So now you know why I did this activity of tracking leaf color changes. So this was based on an inquiry-based learning process where first students have to come up with a question, and I will share some of them soon. And they have to make observations, collect data, they have to analyze and synthesize it and share their findings. So what I asked them to do is using a form developed by Neon to track leaf color changes, but then I also gave them an instrument to measure how light interacted with those leaves. But for today's presentation, I will focus on the first one, and then we will start on week number 3, and then it will continue depending on what Mother Earth wanted to do. We'll see that in a minute. So this is the form they ended up using. So I put them in teams of 3 to 4. And in the first year, and then last year, due to the pandemic, everybody was required to select one deciduous tree on campus, and they have to come up with a question, and they will record their observations at least once every week in this form. And again, no pun intended, they will continue these activities until all the leaves are falling. So this is what that midsection of the form looks like. They have to go every week. They will say, oh, what was the change in color and how many leaves are still remaining? And they have to turn this in on a weekly basis. Some teams were really good. They were turning in 2 forms per week. But from 15, I quickly realized to make this activity more interesting, I need to ask students to select 2 trees at least, where there is a good contrast. So it could be cotton versus aspen, 2 different types of deciduous trees, or it could be an young aspen versus an old one, or some of the trees on campus were growing in a cluster, or they were growing by themselves. So they have to pick in such a way that they can compare the changes, not only within a single tree over time, but also between the trees. Are they changing at the same rate? So to simplify, I wanted to say this was an amazing outcome, that I didn't expect. Students were able to keep applying, oh, this leaf just turned yellow. That means chlorophyll concentration is going to, or is starting to go down. Other pigments are picking up. So students were able to come to me and ask questions. Ramesh, what is happening? My tree is behaving like this. Or sometimes one part of the tree will change. The leaves on one side will change, but not on the other side. So we had a lot of conversation, and I couldn't believe, towards 10, 11, 12th week, we are still talking about things that we were learning in the first 2 weeks of the class. And Mother Nature did its trick in a few years. So one year in 2016, I think we had a very early snowstorm that just pretty much killed all the leaves. So the experiment ended pretty quickly. And then there was one year which was very dry and the leaves were stubborn and they were not falling. We went all the way into mid-November. We were worried whether we'll be able to wrap this exam or not. But overall, I think the outcome was really good. And I am able to use the lessons learned from previous semesters into my lectures in the next year. So that was and other rich activity. But the outcome, rather than me telling more, I would let my student talk about it. So we listened to Jacob. I think he's from Sundance, Wyoming. So I'm going to stop this share so I can open the right window and share this one. So please bear with me. I'm going to share the computer sound. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, thank you.
In all these images, this will be the original unprocessed image, and then this is what they call an unsupervised classification. You set a number of colors and sort the reflectance that is generated from the invisible portion of the light spectrum or infrared. Higher reflectance levels, which are shown here in red, will have higher growth vigor, so this image is extremely vigorous. Other lighter colors, more in the blues, will be like over here, this is where the barn is, so there's really no plant growth. And right through here and here, it's very light colored in strips because there's a county road that runs here and here on both sides of the property. So then after processing, coming over here, I created a smaller subset of colors, grouped things into more defined lines to make it easier to see. So red will be extremely high, very vigorous growth. Green, the dark green will be medium. The pink will be no growth. Tan will be low growth. And then black will signify roads or buildings.
As far as the data collection goes, I took
So I'll just stop this one briefly because we won't have enough time, but I will share the link later so you can see the other student story. But are you seeing this screen now? Okay, so let's see what Jacob found.
Well, what I mostly wanted to look at was, due to the cross fencing, due to the differing management, basically, on the two different sides of this property line, were our management practices being effective? So this started out in 2010. Here's 2012. This is not a great representation because this was another incredibly dry year, and this is still fairly early on in the split fence sort of a deal. I believe this is 2013 or 14. And through these images, you can actually start to see the fence runs right by the buildings and splits the property right along this line. So it's actually interesting that it's a very defined line right along the fence. There's still improvement overall. You can start to see more of this trend develop where you have a longer strip of improved growth through the entirety of the image. Here's 16, again, incredibly dry, and then 18 when things really picked up. The real key was look at the progression of improvement, if there was an improvement being made with feeding, seeding, dragging, etc. There's also been some chemical application for weed control, concentrated on broadleaf weeds. The neat part about all of this is it's a small enough acreage that you can walk every square inch of it, be on the ground with it, and I got double confirmation from my folks that, yeah, I saw it with my own eyes, but they also saw the same things that I was seeing on the ground. There is a very good strip of growth through this bottom ground. There is snakeweed that grew up here. That's how I confirmed in the 2018 image that is what was going on. Is we knew what plant community was there and could confirm it on the ground. And that's what I liked about this project, is it was a small scale start to prove that, at least in this area, because we deal in this area quite a bit, whether we own it or not, that what you see in the image is in fact coinciding with what is on the ground. So you can go forward with confidence in possibly stepping out and in the future going to the neighbors and saying, hey, would you like me to process a larger area to show you what's going on? There may be other weed issues that they don't know about that we might be able to spot.
So thank you for watching that, but I hope you heard all the bits and pieces that Jacob was talking about. He mentioned about classification, he mentioned about accuracy, he mentioned about combining with the existing knowledge on what is happening on the ground. So in other words, he was able to hit so many higher level learning that we expect to see in this class, by laying that strong foundation. So I have to thank David Kido and Steve at Ag Communications for making these great videos, that I shared with you. But despite these good examples, my experience was that only 50% of my class was actively participating. So one big problem I noticed was the teams were not working really as teams. What I mean by that is students will say, okay, first week, so-and-so, it's your responsibility, go collect the data, while we are drinking coffee or something else, And next week it'll be somebody else, and then it didn't work really well. They were not sharing ideas or how to interpret the results, and sometimes people will forget probably whatever they did the night before. They forgot to get up and go collect data, all kinds of problems. So I was looking for a way to improve this activity so that more students will be engaged, And thanks to Rachel, as she mentioned, her persistent efforts, I did sign up for 2019, where I learned so many incredible strategies on active learning, all the way from simple to complex ones. And so I selected 3 of them from that list, that Rachel talked about subsequently, to include and strengthen this particular activity. So here is my post LAMP, and fall 2020 was when I was supposed to hit all the 3 things, but unfortunately the pandemic changed everything. So now I'm hoping in 2021 things will be better. So I looked at this cooperative learning in more detail. That's where I really saw how you can include things such as individual accountability. I think that was lacking in my projects before. And then this positive interdependence, and so how you could trust your teammates to do this versus that, rather than just complaining to me, oh, this person is not doing his or her job, so on and so forth. And then the second piece, I really loved these 1-minute essays. I'm using it in so many classes. So what I planned to do in fall 2020 was to ask everyone to write a 1-minute essay on the reflections from the last week's observation. What did your trees do, or the leaves in the trees do? Why do you think you noticed those colors, et cetera, et cetera? And this will also help me to identify students who are struggling within a group. Overall, the team might be doing well, but there might be students who are struggling with that. So I will be able to track them, and whoever needs assistance, I can go back and say, review these content, review these materials, etc., etc. And then I really liked, I'm sure Rachel will tell me the correct name for this type of small group discussions. But she not only, she talked about it, she made us do it. I remember in physical science building when we met as a follow-up activity, she made us do this one. So small group discussions are very effective, where we put these students in groups. And anyway, these experiments are designed in this way because teams of 3 or 4 students are working in smaller groups. But Rachel taught us one method, where you make one person in the group an ambassador who will go visit or sit with somebody in another group, and that way they can learn, what is happening in the other group and go back to their team and explain. So this was like a rich experience rather than like shuffling students continuously, but just sending one person from my team to another team so that they are learning what is happening on the other side and coming back and reporting. So to conclude, I think incorporating additional strategies were very helpful. I tried one so far, and I'm looking forward to include the remaining two. But I've already included many of the strategies that Rachel and the LAMP team introduced in my lectures. And fall 2020, surprisingly, turned out to be a great opportunity to include active learning methods, because I taught this course as a synchronous online course. And Rachel always mentioned, oh, if you include these methods, students will eventually enjoy and your evaluation will look better. Sure enough, the fall 2020 evaluation was one of the best I had. But having said all that, I'm sure there is a lot more things I need to do to improve my course. So we'll use the rest of the time, please discuss what I propose and let me know how I can improve them. And also, maybe you all have more experience. Some of you have more experience than me. So please tell me, what other strategies I need to consider. And anything else, I have seen like Jared and I have shared so many stories in Sheridan about learning, and then the small team that I worked with, throughout our stay in Sheridan, everyone now, what I do. Please tell me, anything that I need to do to make my class better. With that, I will stop here. Thank you, Rachel, for inviting me.
Thank you, Ramesh, for such a wonderful storytelling style of presentation. I was just caught up in the journey. So we appreciate you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I owe that to some of my great teachers. They are the ones who trained me to tell the stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take some questions for Ramesh.
All right, I'll ask the first one, Ramesh. Of course, very cool class, and I watching the fellow talk about his ranch or his parents' ranch. I feel like clearly he was interested. He learned the vocabulary well. I was amazed the vocabulary he was using in remote sensing already. And so I guess my question to you is, how many of your projects can they use their own data, their own kind of specific thing, and how many are they just like picking the tree on campus? And what's that kind of ratio and balance?
So there are two different activities, which I should have mentioned. What I shared from Jacob was to show the final project, how all the things they learned ended up at the end. So thanks to the low tuition for Wyoming, I have had students from 17 different states in the US who have brought data from their ranches, pasture, or cropland. And they would do exactly what Jacob did, call their parents, and then I will give them the imagery. And then together, we apply those concepts we learned, and they have done those projects. So, I think last year we were supposed to go to Florida, but that student didn't complete the project, due to the pandemic, But then the other group are students who have worked with the US Forest Service, NRCS, BLM to fight wildfires in the summer. And then when they come to my class in fall, they will say, Ramesh, can I use the data for the fire that I just worked last summer? and then they will be using that as project. And I think Rachel and many of you will remember one of my students whom we met in Sheridan. He was a crew leader for BLM. He was in turn training other students on how to use imagery. So by letting them use imagery from a place they are familiar with, and then laying a strong foundation, that's, I think, is the main reason for this outcome.
And if I could just follow up, so you do a little work on your end to prepare the kind of, the downloading, some of the kind of background work yourself. So it's easy for them. They just have the data in a box of the area that they kind of showed you on Google Earth or something. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. So for now, the reason why I'm doing that is right now, a lot of imagery, the way we are teaching, everything has to change because USGS, NASA are all delivering products rather than data itself. So now I have to train students on how to interpret those products, selecting the right one and all that. So that's where I have to redesign my many elements in my course.
I hear you on that. It changes every year, it seems, how these products are given. Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, I really like that question though, Jared, because it calls attention to the ownership that your students have over the process. And it was Jacob, right? He really clearly called to that, where he was using this combination of ways of knowing. So he had employed this, scientific way of knowing to interpret the data and watch over the period of years. But then it was really neat how he came back and knit in like the traditional wisdom of his parents and said, this is also has value and merit in helping me to recognize that what they're seeing on the ground is also what I'm seeing when I interpret the data. So that was a really interesting example of ownership and like honoring different ways of knowing, like within the scientific process.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. That reminds me, I've received letters from the parents, saying that how cool the product was, and they can see what improvements they made on the ground is now picked up by satellites that are 800 kilometers away. They are just fascinated by that one. And sometimes we had very interesting conversations, between students and father when they come to my office. They both try to interpret image. It's kind of fun. It's kind of family gets involved. And I also had many of them go and present in undergrad research day in the subsequent spring semester. So, sometimes from rural Wyoming, places, the whole family shows up. We'll have 10, 12 family members in the audience to listen to what their kids have to share.
Ramesh, I have a question. I have a lot of questions, so I'll just keep it simple. But I love phenology, so I love the fact that you use the leaf color change. I'm so excited about that, and I love trees and using them. I'm curious, how did you choose the teams for your activities? Did you let the students choose them? And the other thing I'm curious about, the 1-minute essays, I'm not familiar with a lot of these things and using them in class. How did you do the 1-minute essays? Were they like on a Padlet or just talking to each other after they shared, or how did you do that? And I'm curious about the teams.
Okay.
And I'm also curious, were you able to use drones for anything, or did any students have technology to use drones?
Okay, so there are 3 questions. Please remind me if I forget to answer any one of them. So I'll answer the easy one first. We are within the 400, we are within the a security radius around the airport, that where we cannot fly drones. So we can't fly them on campus unless we get some special permission, We can do indoor flying, but no outdoor flying because the proximity to the airport. So I have to literally take the students to Vidabo, that's the boundary. And beyond that, they can fly. Okay. So that's number one. And the second one is the teams. The one lesson I learned from the first year is that not let friends or students from the same majors to form their own teams, because that's where there were so many problems because they were buddies, they didn't want to complain, but at the same time, they were frustrated that one person is not doing his or her job. So to promote multidisciplinary things, I will try to team, ESM or rangeland student with agroecology, or that I found to be one. And then I also found out that in general, teams with at least one female student perform a lot better than all male teams. That's something, but I don't think I can make it a requirement that I'll get into trouble. But in general, I found female students are more organized. They keep others on task, and it is really interesting. So those are some things but I have not looked at any other ways of looking at their background before they start my semester. And then the third question you asked about was this 1 minute essay. So I'm still an old generation person, so I use paper. And so students just turn it in and they will tell me, here is what we learned from, or here is what I use it in so many classes, but again, for the last 2 semesters, I'm using the survey tool, the Qualtrics or whatever the right name is. I use that one to let students know what they got out of that lecture or a lab, et cetera, et cetera. But it is amazing to see based on what they are telling, I know, did I get the material across? And if they are saying that correctly or incorrectly, then I know I need to go back and redo that lecture, because I can catch some of those mistakes. Maybe I didn't explain it correctly. So I'm sure Rachel can give a talk, and I'm sure there are other LAMP scholars. Mackenzie, you may have some ideas if you are using them.
I have a follow-up
I'm curious,
question.
oh, sorry.
And Annie, I think this might address some question. On the 1 minute essay, it sounds like you do kind of a general response based on common themes. Is there ever a point where you individually respond on those papers and then turn those back to the students? I think Rachel does a lot of that. And I'm just trying to get a grasp of the outside of class commitment. Like, how long does it take you to get through those?
So as of now, I am using them primarily as a way for me to understand how well the students are learning. I have not given them feedback, but as Christy always mentioned, I'll give them a couple of bonus points, for completing it. So right now I'm not grading it, but it has provided rich information for me.
So Ramesh, are the questions or the talking points cold called? So you just give them, I'm not very good at writing for a minute when someone says, okay, do this, but I'm wondering if it actually helps them later on in an exam when they're just, posed a question and they immediately have to respond.
Yes, I think, for example, some of them, again, Rachel introduced us during the LAMP program. I just asked them, what did you learn in today's class? That was a very common question that I've used many times. Or if I'm talking about 2 different types of classification, I will say, what are you seeing as a strength of this classification method over another one? So I have used a combination where the questions can be completely broad versus a very narrow focused one. you know. So when we get to these labs, what I do is that rather than everybody following the same instructions, I teach the lab in 3 sections. So in one lab section, I set the parameters in such a way that it's different from section 2 and section 3. So each lab, the output will look a little different because they tuned the parameters separately. So I will pull the results from the 3 labs, discuss that in class, and then I will ask them, write a 1-minute essay on what you got out of comparing the 3 outputs. Everybody started with the same input, but their outputs are different because we changed the parameters. So I can say, what is the effect of creating more bins? So it's a combination of both. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, that was great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Annie, I'll just briefly say we'll talk a lot more about team construction throughout our year, but that certainly we do know that diverse teams are better at coming to creative solutions to problems. It doesn't mean there is not a lot of grappling with diverse perspectives, but in the end of the day, they push one another to a higher level of problem solving. So when I sit down to create diverse teams, and I'm actually going to be working on that very shortly for you all in the new LAMP class, I'll be looking at your applications and what I know about you that makes you a unique contributor to the problem solving and learning that we'll be doing, and pairing you really purposefully with folks who are very different from you and have a different perspective and standpoint, so that we can have the most productive problem solving throughout our learning. So I do that with students too. I actually ask them to introduce themselves fairly extensively before the semester starts, and then I go through, sometimes I even color code folks, based on elements that I see rising up in their background and standpoint, and then I make a rainbow, so that I can really get a diverse team, purposely made, as Ramesh said, not, hey, everybody just choose your teams. And there's different ways to do that too. We've done like post-it methods where you ask them a series of questions, and if they ask more likely to answer one way or another, they'll pick a different color post-it. And then the same thing is true there. Find someone with a very different color palette than what you have to pair with or group with.
Yeah. Really, I love this presentation. A couple of things I'd like to pick up on that I really liked. And one of them was when you had the categories and you actually tracked the affect of how people felt about each of these. And that has so much to do with learning, and it's almost unheard of that any professor ever looks at that and makes the distinction between what students liked and really liked and tracks it. And that was wonderful. And the other thing I really loved here is this thing we have the most trouble with on the understanding of science is science versus technology. And both of them are in there. One where you're just recognizing colors is technology, but the other is, why are these colors there? What's happening with the light? And being able to draw students' attention to that, I think those students would come out of the science literacy concept inventory understanding that difference so well that professors always screw up on too. They get lowest on that as well because they haven't thought about what is the difference. And the other thing on the minute paper going to Mackenzie's, I've used these too. And in a class of 85, it took about 4 minutes to go through them. And usually what's so important is there are categories. And I like doing it on paper too when I could do it. And so you just start throwing things into about 3 categories as to where they, and the category with the big stack of where this is the least clear point. This is where you start up your next class, because you know exactly what's confused most of the people. And a lot of people don't know the origin of that paper, too. They credit it to the Angelo and Cross book. They stole it. It's out of a Berkeley physicist, Charles Schwartz, is the one that did it. It took years to get him the credit that he deserved for doing that. And so thanks so much. This was great. I think I might ask you to send me your slide set, because I like to use a couple of your slides there as we're talking about the way science works and science versus technology. There's just such wonderful things captured in there for examples. That this was super. So thanks for a great presentation.
No, thank you. It's really big. I'm very happy to hear that from you with lots of experience. Thank you so much.
I think we have time for one or two questions.
Rachel, this may not be a question, just more of an observation. So Ramesh, through your presentation, it became very clear that you had prior years of experience for teaching, much more than I had going into LAMP. And it seemed you came into LAMP with a very specific objective to find that activity that would allow for long-term retention of that color concept. And I could see how, as you work through LAMP, you accomplish the goal of kind of finding that activity, and now you're just honing in on different techniques. Whereas myself, I came into LAMP very new to the teaching profession, wanting to do and learn lots of different things, not having a very specific objective like you did. So Rachel, I'm just curious, of the new LAMP group that's with us, how many of them might kind of follow Ramesh's trajectory versus mine? And it's just kind of neat to compare the experiences.
So Rachel, can I just say something, sorry to interrupt, so Mackenzie, I just want to acknowledge, I know you are giving me a lot of credit, even though I've been teaching a lot, a lot of it was through trial and error, no systematic process. I stumbled across literature, or when I go to conferences, I'll be talking to my colleagues in other universities. So it was all like a random, haphazard way. Oh, let me try this, and then next year I won't be doing it. So that's when I've attended Rachel's presentations before, because I was in the botany department then, and many of my advisees would say that, no, I will enroll only in Rachel's class, because it was a required course for biology majors. So then I was wondering, who is this Rachel that everybody is talking about? That led me to attending some of her talks, and then I really knew what she is all about, So the LAMP gave me a structure to what I was trying to do earlier. So please don't think that, I had a lot of experience, etc., etc. Sorry, okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ramesh. It's really cool when that's a two-way street, because I was hearing the same thing about you, and I was like, who is this Ramesh character? I need to know him. Oh, it's a really good question, Mackenzie, and I'll let a couple of our most recent, our current class talk to you about where they are. But my favorite thing about every class is that it completely spans the spectrum. Like all the way back to 2016, the very first time we did this, we had fellows like Haley Lanier, and I don't know if anyone remembers her, but she was actually up in Casper, and she was just an incredible pedagogist. Like she'd been through I think she had gone through like the year-long HHMI program and a couple others. And she was just, I mean, she had this stuff nailed down, and she was still like so engaged and loved all of the learning. And I think part of that is that you've got that whole spectrum. So then all the way from that to folks who are like, wait a minute, what does pedagogy mean? Like, I've never heard that word. So it really just spans the board, and that's always the case. And I think, you know, everyone is a little different as to whether they come in with a really specific goal. Like this year, I was just reading back through the applications, and I was reading Michelle Jarman's application, and she just has this wonderfully beautiful statement of how she wants to integrate active learning in her and meld it with disability, you know, queer and crip theory to allow her to accomplish X, Y, and Z. And she's got this really specific outcome that she wants. And then others are like, I hope I learned something cool about teaching, you know? So I like that variety, and I think it's always there. And maybe I could just shout out to folks, you know, like Annie and Vicki, Meredith, you know, where are you all, Barry? I can see a lot of you out there, you know, in terms of coming in with your, you know, hoped for goals, dreams.
Well, I'm new as a full-time faculty. I've been adjuncting for many, many years. And so, I'm also changed what I teach. I went from mostly developmental courses, and now I'm teaching, 2000 level courses. So, to me, it's been a struggle because now I'm teaching courses where the students don't have, to me, a strong enough background to actually be in the course they're in. And so I'm trying to figure out what ways to actually get everybody on board and get them into the same place and going. And so I'm struggling with that now. I've taught the same course now twice, and each time I'm changing things because it's not working this way. So I'll try a different way. And then the thing is that I've had the same students, part of the same students both times. And so I can interact with them and say, okay, what works better? What doesn't work better? And so that's been kind of nice. Not good for them, but good for me. So, I'm just kind of looking to see what other things are out there, really.
Yeah, that's thank you so much, Barry. Like this question of, you know, how could I meet student learning outcomes more effectively? Like, how can I meet them where they are? Any of our new fellows also want to shout out?
I'm just an open book. My favorite T-shirt is Michelangelo. I am still learning. I just want students to succeed, and I'm trying to figure out how to be inclusive so that, if you ask them to write a research proposal for a summer internship, that's the ask, but they all come at it differently and have such diverse backgrounds. And so you get the final product, but then it's like, oh, I wish we had done this and this and this to get them ready. So how do you address all the diversity of learning styles, disabilities, just on and on and on? How do you help them? So, and I don't know a lot about all this active learning stuff. I mean, I think I've been hands-on and done active learning, but no. So I have a lot of learning.
Additionally, we have a lot to learn from you too, Annie. So we're looking forward to a whole year of learning together. And thank you for everything you do to always focus on making the experience that students have a good one. So on that note, I guess we're hitting the end of our time together, and I just
like to make one really important point that I didn't want before we close. And it was talking about the groups and the diversity, and, like adding a woman made it work, or adding a minority. And one of the things that has to be done in groups, and you'll see it in the cooperative learning, you have to train the people to listen. Because very often the minority person won't be listened to if there's three other males. And and the worst thing an employer can do is not make use of the talent they've paid for. And that's what you do in that group when you shut out any voice and you believe that maybe they don't really know. You usually find out they really do know, and that's the most valuable voice. And it's not because, and it's because you've shut it out. That's why you haven't heard it. It's not because they haven't been saying it all along. And so it's really important to train those groups to make sure everybody is heard.
Yeah, you bet. Exactly. Purposeful listening, questioning, right? That climate building, really being purposeful in both the construction of the groups and the training of the teams.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I find that has to be done at the beginning, a couple weeks in, a couple more weeks in. Yeah. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, and I saw Ramesh had Barbara Millis's book cited. That's the best of all of them. And it's really, really hard to get. So if you find a used one on Amazon, pick it up.
Yeah, and I threw the website in there for Cooperative Learning, and her books are cited in there, and she's got a couple, but yeah, her most recent one is fantastic. And I promise more to come on Cooperative Learning throughout our time. And we're going to try to engage you in a lot of these different techniques, and all of them are deep and rich. So there's a whole history of theory and practice behind each one of them. So we're going to salt and pepper you with each one, and then hope that you'll dive deeper into the ones that resonate really well for you.
Okay. So I want to thank everyone, for taking the time this morning to share, so that I can share what I have learned so far. So as always, I have to thank the LAMP program and also ECTL. I don't know how many workshops that I've attended and all that, so every little bit helps. So for those who are new in the program, I encourage you, to explore many things and then choose the ones that will be fitting to your class, So thank you so much and have a great day on my behalf. Yeah.
Thank you, Ramesh.